Hi, I'm Miriam Cates and this is GBN Originals. Today we'll be discussing two groundbreaking legal cases that, although taking place on the opposite sides of the world, are in fact deeply interconnected. They expose the insidious creep of gender ideology into our institutions and the devastating consequences for women and children. Let's start with Sandy Peggy. Sandy is not a politician, not an activist, but a nurse. A nurse who's given 30 years of dedicated service to the NHS and her patients. Her story, unfolding in an employment tribunal in Fife in Scotland, should send shivers down the spine of every woman in this country. Sandy, as you may know, objected to sharing a female staff changing room with a male trans-identified colleague, Dr. Beth Upton. Now, Sandy didn't go looking for a fight. She simply felt deeply uncomfortable, as any reasonable woman would. She tried to avoid using the changing room when Upton was present, but on one occasion she had no choice. She was menstruating heavily, a deeply personal detail that she had to reveal in court because of the absurd lengths to which the case has gone. In a moment of understandable vulnerability, she spoke to Upton, explaining her discomfort. And what was the result? A complaint of bullying. Accusations of transphobia. Sandy Peggy, a woman who has dedicated her life to caring for others, was suspended from her duties and dragged through disciplinary proceedings. Let's just pause there for a moment. A woman, feeling vulnerable, in a female-only space, expresses her discomfort and she's punished for it. Is this what passes for justice in Britain today? Fife NHS Board have even tried to force Sandy's legal team to use female pronouns when referring to Dr. Upton and tried to conduct the hearing in private. Thankfully, they failed on both counts. Now, the details emerging from this trial are frankly shocking. The NHS's legal team accused Peggy's barrister of dead-naming Upton by presenting a document that referred to Dr. Upton's gender and male name, Theodore, at the time of his original GMC registration. Apparently, this dead-naming could cause the doctor extreme distress. And now let's turn to Australia, to another landmark case titled Giggle versus Tickle. Despite its amusing name, this lawsuit is another seriously disturbing case that highlights the relentless assault on women's spaces. Giggle for Girls is a networking app designed exclusively for women. Sal Grover, the founder of the app, created it to provide a safe and supportive space for women to connect, network and share experiences without men. Seems perfectly reasonable, doesn't it? But Roxanne Tickle, a biological male who identifies as a woman, sued Giggle after being denied membership. He claimed the app's female-only policy was discriminatory, and shockingly, the Federal Court of Australia agreed. The court ordered Giggle to pay Tickle 10,000 Australian dollars in compensation to cover his legal costs. Let that sink in. A man is rewarded for demanding access to a space specifically designed for women. The court even stated, and I quote, that sex is not confined to being a biological concept, referring to whether a person at birth had male or female physical traits, nor confined to being a binary concept limited to the male or female sex. This is utter madness. How can a court of law deny basic biological reality? How can they ignore the very purpose of single-sex spaces, which is to protect the safety, privacy and dignity of women? Sal Grover rightly points out that the women's movement has fought for decades for the right to have female-only spaces. This ruling effectively wipes away those hard-won rights, opening the door for men to demand access to any and all female spaces simply by claiming to identify as a woman. This is not about equality, it's about the erasure of women. As Catherine Deeves, the legal representative for Giggle, has said, women's international human rights will now be lost if woman includes any male who identifies as such. Now, this case highlights the absurdity and danger of enshrining gender identity into law. As Robert Clark of ADF International, who supported Giggle's defence, rightly said, sex is never changeable. The court's ruling ignores Australia's obligations under the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women to protect women's rights. Earlier this week, I spoke to both Sal and Catherine for GB News. Let's take a listen to what they had to say.
So in 2022, I received an Australian Human Rights Commission complaint citing gender identity discrimination. And to settle it, basically, I would have to let this man on the app, let all men who claim to be women on the app, go to sex and gender education, which could only be one thing, pay him $20,000 and moderate all the content on the app so that no man who claims to be a woman was offended. And I was like, I'm not doing any of that.
And this is an app specifically for women?
It was just an app for women. And I mean, I don't even remember removing him because men would get on and we would remove them. Like, this was not an event. And so I was just like, absolutely no way am I going to agree to any of this. I was also, at the time, I was 15 weeks pregnant when I got the complaint. And so as we were going through the process, by the time it was like time for me to make a decision whether I would settle or not, I mean, I'd had scans. I'd found out I was having a girl. I was like, sex is not assigned at birth. Like, I know, this is just nonsense. My lived experience is proving what you guys are saying is nonsense. So I said no, and it escalated to federal court. And it's been a long process, obviously. And last year we got the decision where the judge decided that sex is changeable. Men can be women. Gender identity is more important than sex in law. And yeah, I mean, it was as crazy as you can imagine.
And extraordinarily, you were shown an image in court that made you laugh. What happened next?
So basically, during cross-examination, I was asked to sort of turn to the court book to have a look at an image that was a meme someone else had created of Roxanne Tickle. And the aim of it was to be a funny meme, and it was sort of saying that he just didn't like the smell of sweaty balls. It was sort of like paraphrasing him off an interview he had done on SBS in Australia. And it was just, the situation was so insane. I mean, federal court being asked to look at a meme that says sweaty balls. And I laughed at it. I laughed at it because it was just, this is so surreal. Yeah. And because of that, the damages that Tickle was awarded, $10,000 because I laughed.
Astonishing, hurt feelings. Now, Catherine, you're representing your solicitor in this case, and what seems extraordinary to me is that the judge has decided, based on law, that sex is changeable and can't be fixed or can't be decided. What implications does this have, not only in Australia but also around the world?
Well, this is setting a precedent in the war between gender identity and sex-based rights. And here in Australia, the judge decided that gender identity takes primacy. He also redefined sex to say that it is changeable, it is not binary, and it is not necessarily rooted in biology. It can also be how you are perceived by others and how you socially present yourself. So obviously that has grave implications for women. But further to that, the way that it was decided was the judge relied on decisions within tribunals at the United Nations. So these are faceless, unaccountable bureaucrats who've made decisions about sort of discrete, very specific circumstances and then applied it to our domestic law. So we're seeing the United Nations able to intrude upon national sovereignty for our ability, like overriding domestic law. So for any other common law countries that are faced with this question and that are signed up as member nation states to bodies like the United Nations, I mean, we're seeing this intrusion into national sovereignty. So this has very grave implications for other common law countries.
Now, Sal, it would have been easy for you to, especially being pregnant, to just say, I can't be bothered to fight this case, but you've been extraordinarily brave. And, you know, there are comic aspects of this case. It's called Giggle versus Tickle. But it's not comic for you, is it? What have been the consequences? And also you, Catherine, what have been the consequences personally, very, very quickly?
Well, I mean, you say sort of it would have been easy. No, it wouldn't. I am actually a woman. I have a daughter. Kath has 3 daughters. It wouldn't be easy to sit back and just accept that, like, we had been erased in law. It's easier to actually fight because you go, oh, we can actually win this in the end. So I don't regret it for a second, but I am very much looking forward to when it's over.
These cases of nurse Sandy Peggy and the Giggle versus Tickle case are not isolated incidents. They're a symptom of a much larger problem, the relentless push to normalise gender ideology and impose it on every aspect of our lives, from hospital changing rooms to online networking apps. This ideology, which claims that gender is a fluid, subjective feeling rather than an objective biological reality, is not only scientifically false, but deeply harmful. It undermines the rights and protections of women, it silences dissenting voices, and it confuses and endangers our children. It is, of course, understandable that children can be brainwashed into believing this gender madness. But what strikes me most is the willingness of educated adults to abandon common sense and basic biology at the altar of gender ideology. They seem unable to grasp why women need single-sex facilities and why simply putting on a dress does not transform a man into a woman. Let's go back to basics. There are two sexes, male and female. This isn't bigotry, it's biology. Women on average are physically weaker than men. Single-sex spaces are not about discrimination. They are about safety, dignity, and the protection of women from potential harm. Now, we've built legal, moral, and social structures over centuries, and indeed millennia, to protect women from predatory men. And now these structures are being undermined. When we erode these social conventions by celebrating rather than stigmatising men who want to invade women's spaces, we erode centuries of protections for women and girls. To ask a woman to suppress that strong instinct in order to protect a man from having hurty feelings is frankly barbaric. Now, I understand why some men don't fully understand how distressing it is for a woman to be forced to share a private space with a man she doesn't know. But how can some women defend the rights of men to use female toilets, changing rooms, and even prison cells? Either these women don't believe a word of what they're saying, but for reasons of virtue signalling or gaining status, they go along with it. Often these women are highly educated, young and wealthy, and therefore unlikely to be personally affected by the presence of men in women's prisons or hospital wards. Or perhaps women who defend gender ideology are genuinely brainwashed themselves into believing that a man who wears lipstick somehow magically becomes female. Elon Musk has called this the woke mind virus, and like a pathogen, gender ideology does seem to have infected many. We know human beings can be highly susceptible to falsehoods, even in the face of strong evidence to the contrary. History is littered with examples of people who have been enticed to do and believe terrible things under the influence of different ideologies. We are told that to question this ideology is to be hateful, transphobic, or bigoted. But I refuse to be silenced, and I hope you'll join me in speaking out. We must defend the truth about biological sex, protect the safety and dignity of women, and safeguard the innocence of our children. The stakes are too high. The future of our society depends on it. We need to stand with women like Sandy Peggy and Sal Grover, who are bravely defending their rights in the face of intimidation and harassment. We need to demand that our institutions prioritise common sense over ideology, and that our laws protect the vulnerable rather than pandering to the demands of a radical minority. I do think there is hope. We are seeing glimmers of sanity emerging from across the Atlantic. President Trump, in his inauguration speech last month, stated that the US now recognises just two sexes, male and female. The 47th president has put a stop to gender surgery for children and banned males from competing in female sport. He's called time on the use of preferred pronouns in email signatures, a practice that had served to propagate the lie that gender is a spectrum, chosen, not given. The time for complacency is over. The battle for truth, for women's rights, and for the well-being of our children is upon us. Let's stand together, speak truth to power, and reclaim our society from the grip of gender ideology. Thanks for watching. This has been Miriam Cates, and don't forget to subscribe to GB News YouTube for more.